Hello, wine lovers! I'm Yaroslava, sommelier and wine educator, your guide on this journey through the world of wines, cocktails and spirits. Today, we will uncork the third bottle of champagne knowledge. The first one was full of champagne history. The second explored the technology behind its production. You can find links to previous episodes in the first comment. In this episode, we will continue our exploration of the technology behind champagne. We have already covered the grape varieties allowed for champagne production, the creation of a base wine, and the blending of the cuvee. In this episode, I will walk you through the transformation of still wine into sparkling, the importance of maturation on lees, the different levels of champagne sweetness, the process of achieving crystal clarity, and many other fascinating aspects. Let's revisit the traditional method of champagne production. We have covered the production of base wine and the blending of the cuvee. Now it's time for the second fermentation, maturation on lees, removal of sediment, sweetening, and the final corking. The main protagonist of our story, bubbles. Time for the secondary fermentation. The wine is bottled and small amount of liqueur de triage is added to each bottle. Liqueur de triage is a mixture of sugar, yeast and grape juice. The quantity of sugar is determined by the desired pressure of CO2 in the bottle, which aims for 5-6 atmospheres in the case of champagne. For a standard size bottle, this translates into 24-25 grams of sugar. The bottles are sealed either with crown cap or standard cork for champagne secured with wire. Why most producers now favor crown caps for their cost effectiveness and ease of opening during sediment removal, it's essential to note that this innovation was only emerged at the end of the 19th century. Champagne producers, being traditional, tend to stick to their roots, and some continue using the standard cork. The yeast begins its usual work, converting sugar into ethanol and CO2. This addition to alcohol already present in the base wine results in an additional 1.5–2%. Consequently, the base wine should have a relatively low alcohol content, typically around 10.5%. Sparkling wine should not be too strong, as it could interfere with a delicate taste. Yeast produces CO2 in a calculated amount after consuming all the sugar. For a standard bottle of champagne, it's approximately 5 liters. As the bottle is tightly sealed, all the CO2 is preserved inside. However, it is not just the volume of CO2 that matters. The quality of the bubbles is also crucial. Higher quality bubbles are very small and gracefully ascend in the narrow streams for hours. Two factors play a vital role in the formation of quality bubbles. Firstly, the temperature during secondary fermentation and subsequently maturation. Lower temperatures are favorable. Of course, it should not be below the temperature at which yeast can function. The maximum temperature used for champagne secondary fermentation is 14 degrees centigrade, taking 2 weeks in this case. More commonly, temperatures range from 10 to 12 degrees centigrade, and in this condition, yeast works for about 6 weeks. The second crucial factor is the duration of lees maturation. Either early or later, yeast eventually consume all the sugar and perish due to starvation. This leads us to the next critical step, responsible for the quality of bubbles and the distinctive taste of champagne, maturation on lees. Lee is a sediment formed from the dead yeast. During maturation on lees, the dead yeast undergo autolysis, breaking down and releasing various molecules into the wine, such as proteins, peptides, polycarbonates, lipids, and more. The longer the wine remains on lees, the more different molecules transfer into solution. These molecules play a pivotal role in enhancing both the quality of bubbles and the specific taste of the wine. For the formation of CO2 bubbles, a nucleation center is essential, something firm for the bubbles to attach to. The greater the number of molecules dissolved in the wine, when more bubbles will be formed at the bottle opening, and smaller and more refined they will be. Indeed, these sediments not only impacts the quality of bubbles, but also impart a specific aroma of nut and baking to champagne. The taste also undergoes changes due to slower oxidation caused by the oxygen that was sealed in the bottle, along with some that transferred from the cork. The longer champagne matures on Lee, the more intriguing and complex its taste becomes, accompanied by a longer, graceful stream of finer bubbles. Non-vintage wines should be aged on Lee for a minimum of 12 months, totaling at least 15 months. Vintage ones undergo Lee maturation for a minimum of 3 years. However, champagne producers frequently exceed these standards. Less expensive wines may be aged for 2-3 years, while more expensive ones for 3-4 years. Vintage champagnes are often matured for 6 years, and Tite de Cuvée can age on Lee for up to 15 years. This prolonged maturation on Lee contributes to the more complex taste of champagne compared with other sparkling wines made using the same method but requiring only 9-12 months of Lee maturation. Bubbles in champagne are not just about giving the wine a lovely appearance and playfully tickling the tongue. They form a sophisticated system for delivering aromas. The concentration of certain molecules in the bubbles can be even higher than in the liquid itself. This is why flat wine has a less vibrant taste. As a result, the ideal glass for sparkling wine is a tall, narrow champagne flute, as it allows the bubbling to be retained for a longer duration. In contrast, wide, shallow colbs, popular in the roaring 20s, cause champagne to quickly lose its bubbling and taste. However, colbs can be stuck into grand tower and poured together, which is impractical with flutes. So, colbs are most suitable for a wild party rather than for appreciation of delightful wine. Moreover, high-quality champagne glasses have small stretches are intentionally made on the bottom to initiate the formation of a narrow, long stream of bubbles, enhancing the overall sensory experience. Let's take a look how bubbles appear in wines made using different techniques. Here I have 3 glasses with freshly poured wines. In the first glass we have Cremant de Bourgogne, a sparkling wine made using the traditional method and aged on Lee for 1 year. You can notice small bubbles with stable streams that continue to bubble for much longer than my speech. In second glass we have Prosecco, a wine made using the tank method. I will discuss this method in more details in future episodes, but for now let's focus on the bubbles. The wine is infused with CO2 during secondary fermentation, but does not spend any time on Lee. The bubbles here are larger than those in the Cremant and quickly dissipate, with almost no bubbles left in the wine after 10 minutes. In the third glass, we have a wine produced using pressurized CO2. There is no secondary fermentation or maturation on Lee here, just still wine infused with CO2 to create a soda. While this method may be fine for tonic or real soda, I prefer to avoid wine made this way. In just a few seconds, most of the bubbles have left the wine, and after just a couple of minutes, there is almost nothing left. So, in summary, within just 2 minutes, we can observe how the bubbles behave differently in each wine. The Cremant maintains its stream of tiny bubbles, the Prosecco loses most of its bubbles but retains some, and the wine made with pressurized CO2 has almost no bubbles remaining. No need to further conclusion, everything is clear. After maturation on Lee, it's a time for sediment removal, a crucial step that must be executed without causing wine thickening or losing its bubbles. It's worth to mention that when we say champagne, we are referring to a crystal clear drink. This is not just an epithet, it's a technical term in wine description. However, up until the end of the 18th century, champagne was a rougher, cloudy wine. No one has discovered a way to remove the yeast sediment without losing CO2, and without bubbles, champagne is not champagne. It was only at the beginning of the 19th century that Antoine Muller, a legendary cellar master who worked for Madame Clicquot Champagne House, developed a method still used today. Nothing better has been invented since. Bottles are positioned in special rack, neck down, at a 35-degree angle. Each day, the angle is gradually increased, and the bottles are turned to ensure that the sediments migrate into the necks. This entire process takes about 8 weeks for champagne, while for other sparkling wines it typically takes only 2 weeks. Initially done by hand, this process is now fully automated, controlled by computers. However, some champagne houses still opt to do it manually, particularly for their tête de cuvée, often as a tradition or attraction for visitors. At the conclusion of a process, the bottles remain vertical, necks down, allowing on sediments to concentrate in the necks, resulting in clear crystal wine. Following this, the bottles are chilled to maximize CO2 solubility, reaching a temperature of about 4 degrees centigrade. The necks of the bottle are immersed in the solution usually made with ethylene glycol, with a temperature below freezing. The bottles are positioned neck down, with sediments concentrated in the necks. The content of the necks freezes and the bottle then are turned neck up. The cores are removed, allowing the pressure to expel the frozen icicles along with the sediment from the necks. Subsequently, the bottles are topped up, corked, and if the desired style is not dry, liqueur d'expédition, sweetened wine, might be added. Now let's delve into the classification of champagne based on sweetness. The sweetness of champagne is determined by the amount of sweet wine added before corking, as after the second fermentation all champagne is dry. It is important to note that the terms used for champagne sweetness don't correspond to the literal meaning of the words and differ from the classification used for still wines. So let's explore these terms to better understand the sweetness level of champagne. So by sweetness, champagne is divided on 4 groups. Brut nature 0.3% of sugar. Extra brut 0.6% of sugar. Both completely dry, no sugar added. Into the next grade, brut, sugar also never added, but most dry wine naturally have some small amount of residual sugar. Such small amount as in brut nature and extra brut happens very rare, so they are separated in the special group, and they were divided in 2, although they are overlap. Brut 0.6, 1.2% of sugar. Dry wine. Nowadays most champagne are brut. Extra dry 1.2, 1.7%. Semi-dry, although the name means very dry. Sec 1.7, 3.2%. Although sec means dry, the wine is really semi-sweet. Demi-sec 3.2, 5% of sugar. Sweet, although name means semi-sweet. Doux, more than 5% of sugar, very sweet, licorice. It is interesting to note that for modern wine enthusiasts, champagne and brut are almost synonymous. However, until the mid-19th century, champagne was predominantly sweet, with very high sugar content, around 20%, 200 grams per liter, comparable to a syrup. This sweet champagne was consumed very cold as a dessert. In the first half of the 19th century, Russia was the second largest importer of champagne, and the Russians have a preference for even sweeter varieties, with wine made containing 30% of sugar. On the contrary, English consumers preferred less sweet champagne, twice less as standard, advocating for a gradual reduction in the sugar content. Thanks to their influence, by the early 20th century the term brut emerged, marking a significant shift toward drier champagne. At this stage, the wine is technically ready for consumption, but it typically undergoes the additional 6 months resting period to achieve complete taste harmony. It's worth noting that unlike still wines, prolonged storage of champagne and other sparkling wines made by the same method does not provide additional benefits. The optimal time for consumption is within the first year after release, so it's advised not to let your champagne sit on the shelf. So, we explored the traditional method of sparkling wine production, also known as Méthode Champenoise. Champagne can only be made using the Méthode Champenoise. It is important to note that some other excellent sparkling wines are also crafted using the traditional method. You can identify these wines by checking the labels, where you will find mentions such as Méthode Champenoise, Méthode Traditionnelle, traditional method, or same thing on the producer's language. Here, for example, Spanish cava, made by traditional method. Actually, any cava are made by traditional method. I will definitely talk about cava soon. Crema de Loire, Méthode Traditionnelle. Again, all cava are made by this way. About crema I also will talk. New Zealand sparkling wine, traditional method. New Zealand has climate that's quite good for sparkling wines production, and winemakers there make very good examples. Interestingly, champagne labels won't have this specific indication, since there is no alternative method used in champagne production. Now we have uncovered the secrets behind crafting champagne. In the next episode, we will delve into the world of champagne producers, explore the valuable information embedded in champagne labels, delve into the significance of different champagne bottle size, and learn many other intriguing aspects. So, stay tuned for more interesting insights. Subscribe to my channel. And now, let's raise a glass of champagne. Santé!